Hey everyone, welcome back. Today I want to talk to you about something that is so common, so prevalent, and so important. And that is assessing change. When you have told your partner that you are done and that you do not want to stay married to them, and all of a sudden, they promise the world. They want to go to therapy, right? There are all of these promises based on their panic, right? He's panicking. And he makes all of these promises, all of these declarations. He makes apologies that sound deeper than anything you've ever heard before. Now he wants to go to therapy. He finally gets it. He's asking for time. Just give me 3 months. Give me 6 months. Just give me a chance. And then you are stuck in that awful, exhausting place where you're asking yourself, is this real? Can he do this? Or is this just more of the same, more promises? Is this his fear talking? Can, if he if he can change on a dime like that, why didn't he before? But he's saying he can now. I guess he didn't feel like he had to. So this is all the confusion and the insanity that we are going to unpack today. How to tell the difference between genuine commitment and a crisis reaction without gaslighting yourself or putting your safety and autonomy at risk or on hold. So let's start by naming what's usually happening in this moment, because once you can name it, it becomes a lot easier to see clearly. When an abusive or controlling partner is faced with the reality of separation or divorce, what often shows up is what's called a crisis response. So this isn't always conscious manipulation, truly. It's not. Sometimes it is genuine panic. Their nervous system is flooded, their identity is threatened, their access to control is slipping. And in that panic, they promise everything. And the thing that makes this so confusing is that the emotion can feel very genuine. And often it is. It is genuine. But panic is not the same as transformation. Crisis response is about like stopping the loss, right? That's what the crisis response is about, putting an end to you putting an end to the marriage. It's stopping this in its tracks. Real change is about dismantling entitlement. So one, right, crisis response is urgent and emotional. Real change is slow, it is uncomfortable, and it is deeply unflattering. So here's a truth that I want you to really let land. Most abusive partners are very motivated to feel better. Very few are motivated to give up power. And that difference matters more than anything else. So let's get really concrete, because vagueness is where hope turns into self-betrayal, right? Vagueness is where hope goes to die. When somebody tells you that they're going to change, what does real change actually look like? What are you looking for? Not in theory, not in intention, but in real life. Well, first of all, real change shows up in sustained action, not emotional displays, sustained action. It's not measured by tears, apologies, or big realizations, right? The big aha moments. It's measured in consistent behavior over time. So this includes things like seeking out individual therapy, not couples therapy, individual. Working with a therapist trained specifically in abuse dynamics, staying in therapy, even when it gets super uncomfortable, following through without you managing, reminding, or monitoring the process. Like if you're still the one carrying the emotional and logistic labor of his change, that is not transformation. That is performance, right? So first, real change shows up as sustained action, not emotional displays. Second, real change requires a shift in core attitudes. This is about how someone understands power, control, and responsibility. So ask yourself, does he stop minimizing your feelings? Does he take responsibility without adding, but you, right? I get it, you're right, I do this, but you also. No. Does he acknowledge the harm without reframing himself as the victim? I know I've been such an asshole. I'm so sorry. It's just my childhood trauma. I feel like such an asshole now. And suddenly you're taking care of him. This is where they, often threaten suicide. So accountability that comes with conditions is not accountability. Okay. And third, and this one is huge, real change does not come with pressure. Someone who is truly committed to change does not rush your healing. They don't ask when you're going to be over it. They don't demand reassurance. They don't need you to validate their effort before you've actually seen results. They're not going to say, I will do the work if you promise that, in 3 months we can, get back together. I'll essentially their willingness to do the work is conditional upon you wanting to stay, promising you'll stay if they do the work, right? Urgency like that is a red flag. Pressure is a red flag. Okay, and fourth, real change involves openness to accountability. Not just going to therapy, but transparency. Not just insight, but follow through. Not only words, but a willingness to accept feedback and consequences without collapsing or retaliating. And finally, real change is consistent across contexts. So it doesn't show up. It doesn't only show up when you're watching. It shows up under stress. It shows up with your children. It shows up with other people. So if the new behavior disappears the moment things get uncomfortable, that's really big information because that's not transformation, right? So I just want to repeat, there are five things to look for. Real change. What real change looks like. First, sustained action, not emotional displays. 2, real shifts in core attitudes. 3, there's no pressure. 4, there's an openness to accountability. And 5, consistent across contexts. So with that, let's talk about the question I hear all the time, right? What if he says he'll do the work and asks for like 3 to 6 months to prove it? Okay. Sounds very reasonable. It might even sound generous or fair. But let's be very clear about what that time frame, 3 to 6 months, can and cannot tell you. First of all, 3 to 6 months is not enough time to prove that abusive patterns have changed. Abusive patterns are based on a underlying core belief system. that is based on a hierarchy in the relationship. So 3 to 6 months to change complete belief systems, not possible. But it is enough time to see whether someone is genuinely engaged in the process. So what you're watching for in that window isn't necessarily transformation, right? It, it won't happen. And if it does happen, it's a mask. What you're watching for is trajectory. Is the effort increasing or is it fading once the immediate crisis passes? That's usually 2 to 3 months, even sometimes a couple of weeks. Because very often what will happen is this, right? There's the threat of separation, and then that kind of starts to ease a little bit. The urgency drops, and then therapy becomes inconsistent. They're not going all the time. Maybe they're checking in. Accountability starts to soften, and then the old patterns quietly return. So a drop off in effort is data. And I want to say this really clearly. You are not obligated to pause your life, your healing, or your planning while someone figures out whether they're willing to change. If you choose to observe for a period, you can and should do so while remaining physically separate, legally protected, and emotionally boundaried. Waiting should not require self-sacrifice. This is where I talk about the fact that they should win you back with their work, right? You should continue your trajectory of leaving. And if you observe that they do the work and that there is actual transformation occurring, you might consider stepping closer to the relationship again. But you don't stay as status quo while they do the work, because you'll immediately see, you will see if you do that, that like they'll stop because they won, right? They got it. You took the threat off the table. They got what they wanted. They'll start up again, right? So I want you to continue with your separation and see if they're doing this work actually authentically, because they understand that they have to change regardless of your relationship status. So if promises aren't the thing to trust, right? What is? The answer is simple and it's really hard. You trust patterns over time. One of the most grounding things that you can do during this time is to keep a private log, not to obsess, but to anchor yourself in reality. I want you to write down what happens during stress, how accountability shows up or doesn't, whether respect is consistent. How does your body feel around him? I want you to ask yourself, do I feel safer? Do I feel more respected? Do I feel less vigilant or more? Your nervous system is data. If you're still bracing, shrinking, or monitoring, that matters. So before we go any further, I want to say this out loud because too many women are quietly carrying the opposite belief. Your safety and autonomy do not become negotiable just because someone promises to change. You do not owe anyone access to you in order for them to heal. I'm going to say that again. You do not owe anyone access to you in order for them to heal. You are allowed to move at your own pace. You are allowed to continue legal and logistical planning. You are allowed to protect your children, and you are allowed to change your mind. Hope does not require paralysis. And it's important to remember that when abusive partners sense a loss of control, behavior can and usually does escalate. Sometimes through love bombing, through anger, sometimes through manipulation that will look like vulnerability. If anything starts to feel unsafe emotionally or physically, that is your cue to step back and get support. So, let's talk about the moment that feels really delicate to a lot of women, right? You've called out the behavior, you've named the impact, he's agreed to therapy, but he hasn't connected his actions to abuse. And you know that not all therapy is the right therapy, right? Because we talked about that. They have to see a therapist who specializes in dismantling abusive patterns. But you don't really want to say, like, well, you're abusive, so you need to see an abuser therapist. Maybe that doesn't feel safe to you, right? Like, how do you express that without necessarily naming that, right? So, first of all, you don't have to diagnose him, right? You don't have to label him as abusive. You can say these behaviors feel like abuse to me. Which, by the way, he doesn't get to say whether it's abusive or not. You kind of do, right? Because you're the one receiving the impact. And if that makes him really angry and unwilling to move on and move further in the healing process, that's also data. But if you don't feel like diagnosing him or labeling him, you can focus on patterns and impact. So you might say something like, listen, I appreciate that you're willing to go to therapy. I have learned that the issues we've been dealing with go beyond typical relationship problems. They involve patterns of control and emotional harm. So standard therapy isn't often equipped to address that. And if you're serious about change, it's important that you work with someone who understands emotional abuse and coercive control. And then you say, and this is important, I need to see you commit to that level of support because anything less won't address the real issues. So you're not issuing an ultimatum. You're simply naming a requirement. And how he responds, defensive, minimizing, guilt, anger, all of that, any of those responses, again, is data. That is information. So let's sort of slow this down for a minute because I guessing that this might have stirred up a lot for you. So take a deep breath for a minute. I want you to know this. You are not cruel for questioning his promises. If you are feeling the weight of, I don't trust this, I don't trust like this sudden turnaround, right? That is absolutely valid. And on the other side, you're not broken for wanting to believe in this, right? Like, of course you do. Hope, again, like, of course you want this change to be real. You're not obligated to stay confused in order to be compassionate, right? So real change is slow. It is uncomfortable. And without deep, sustained, and professional intervention, it's very, very rare. So it's really important that you take a step back so that you can more objectively observe the relationship and the patterns. Trust what you observe. Trust your body. And you don't need certainty to choose yourself, right? You might still be confused, but if you are still confused, you still get to choose yourself. You don't need certainty, you just need honesty. So, along with this episode, I have created a worksheet that you can download um, as a PDF. You can print it, and this is going to help you assess change. Remember when I said sort of, notice patterns and keep a log of those patterns? I've created a downloadable worksheet for you to be able to do that. And you can find that at kateanthony.com hold on, I'll do that again, Darlene. kateanthony.com slash assessing change. So kateanthony.com slash assessing change, and you can download your free worksheet to help you and guide you in this assessment process for this period of time. So I really hope that this was helpful. I know a lot of you might feel very discouraged about this information, but it is so important. Guys, I cannot tell you the number of people I work with who have gone through this cycle numerous times because their partners, because they believe the quick, big changes. And then over time, everything slips off and they feel so bad about themselves. They feel guilty. They feel angry. They feel shame that they went through the cycle and they ended up in the same place. That's not your fault. That's not their fault. If this is you, it is not your fault. This is really complicated shit. And you are working, we are asking you, I am asking you to use an objective part of your brain at the same time that you are full of hope and fear and confusion. And I'm asking you to assess, like literally the word assess requires like the prefrontal cortex of executive function that has been hijacked over years of trauma from the abuse, which is why the separation and continuing to get away from the person in order to objectively assess the change is so important. If you have been through this cycle one or numerous times, it is not your fault at all. There's a complicated process that few people talk about in terms of how to assess this change. And it's deep and it's complicated. And again, it requires an executive function that is not really present for you if you've been emotionally abused for any time at all. Anyway, I love you. I adore you. I am here for you. If any of this feels familiar and you're feeling like, oh my God, everything Kate just said is like on the money, there's a reason for that. Number one, because almost all of my clients go through this. So over the number of years that I've been doing this, over a decade, I have worked with hundreds, if not thousands of women who go through this exact process. So you're not alone. If you need more support, I will tell you that my private coaching or my Phoenix Rising is a brilliant place to get the support because you've got, I'm doing a podcast episode of this for like tens of thousands of listeners or hundreds of thousands of listeners. I don't even know my stats anymore. So obviously you're not alone, right? And this is not a time to be isolated. So please get support, whether that's with me, somebody else, I don't care, get support. I would love it to be me. I love and adore you, and I'll see you next time.